Mr. Zoo Nation, aka Savage Armor Jones Giraffe, and welcome to the very first episode of Unpopular Opinions. Alright, basically it's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to talk about the card game, then I'm going to talk about the unpopular opinion, and then so forth and so forth. So this is going to be a long video, I already know it. So with all that being said, let's just get this started. Let's get it on the road and everything else like that. Alright, so the very first one is going to be for the Pokemon TCG. In my unpopular opinion, is that the game should not be part of the budget conversation. Alright, so this one's kind of sort of a weird one, but hear me out. I don't think Pokemon should be part of the conversation when it comes to, talking about, playing a budget deck in a competitive scene. And the reason being is actually two reasons in general. I think the first one basically comes down to Pokemon, how big the Pokemon franchise is overall, right? For a prime example, if I had to choose any franchise that can basically take down Disney, it is definitely Pokemon. Pokemon is that big of a franchise, and because of this basically means that throughout the 30 years that it actually existed, it actually has the funds, and it actually has everything to fork out decks that are $40 and everything else like that, and at the same time, right, I think the major issue is that other card games doesn't have this leeway despite the other companies being very big. So yeah, that includes Konami, that includes Wizards, that includes Bandai Namco and everything else like that. The thing is that they don't have the leeway, or at least the funds that Pokemon has, because remember, Pokemon have multiple merchandise surges throughout these 30 years. When it first came out, I think around 10 years ago, and then I think around what was it, maybe during pandemic as well. So they have multiple merchandise surges and everything else like that. And as much as I don't want to give this particular group credit, I have no choice. The scalpers also is one of the reasons why they can fork out $40 decks and get $400 in profits and everything else like that. Let's just be real on that. And that's all base rarity deck and all this other stuff like that. The second reason is the overall target audience. When you really think about it, the target audience is basically two particular groups. The group that grew up with Pokemon around the time it came out, high millennials, that's in my generation, and then the second one is the newer generation of kids that is growing up with Pokemon and everything else like that. Now, let's talk about the other target audience, the kids that are growing up with Pokemon currently, right? Let's say little Timmy wants to become a Pokemon master and everything else like that. And in order to do this, little Timmy's parents gotta basically buy little Timmy a Pokemon deck and everything else like that to be competitive with the big boys. And here's the thing, $40 is a pretty reasonable price for a kid to get into a card game and everything else like that, because guess who also has the exact same target audience? Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Also has the exact same target audience. People from my generation who grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! Hi again, millennials. And then at the same time, the newer generation of kids that are growing up with Yu-Gi-Oh! And everything else like that. But however, you also gotta realize that Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks are $200-$300, just to play in the meta and everything else like that. So if little Timmy's parents notice that this Pokemon deck is gonna be $40 compared to the $200 that is a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Obviously, Lil Timmy's parents is basically gonna fork out that $40 over spending $200 for Lil Jimmy and everything else like that. But yeah, basically when you put all that into consideration, it would make sense. They have enough profits to basically fork out $40 decks, because guess what? They're going to make $400 in profit out of those particular decks. And then at the same time, the parents like Lil Jimmy's and everything else like that is basically going to want to fork out $40 over $400. Also, I know this from personal fucking experience. I mean, not like in the Pokemon aspect, but in the Yu-Gi-Oh aspect. I'm not even gonna hold you. I remember growing up with Yu-Gi-Oh and everything else like that, and I remember like going to a mall, going to this anime manga store at the time, and you know, I remember like, I don't remember what the name of it was, but it had like an Inuyasha, it had like Inuyasha like in front of it and everything else like that. But like, I went in there, they basically had like a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh singles, and if I remember correctly, I think it was Orlo Dragon, I'm not too sure, but I wanted the card, and the card was like $17 and everything else like that. My mom looked at me like I was crazy, like, well, I'm gonna spend $17 on one card and everything else like that. And here's the thing, I didn't grow up like low class or anything else like that. I kind of grew up as a middle class kid. Like, I had the privilege to watch, you know, Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and everything else like that. So it wasn't the simple fact that we were struggling for money or anything else like that. It was just a simple fact that my mom did not like spending unnecessary money, which, looking at it back as an adult, it kind of actually makes sense when you really think about it. But then, I know what you think. Why don't you just get the starter decks and everything else like that? You didn't have to buy like 10 packs and everything else like that to make a full deck. Yeah, I did. But for one, at the time, I didn't know you were supposed to buy 3 of them motherfuckers. And even if I did know that you were supposed to buy 3 of them motherfuckers, I don't think my mom would have bought 3 of them motherfuckers at once and everything else like that. So I had to deal with 1 Dark Magician, 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon, 1 Red Eyes Black Dragon, 1 Relinquished. Wait. Let me back up a little bit. 2 Dark Magicians and 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons. Because you know what? I forgot there was another version of the Yugi and Kaiba starter decks. I forgot about that. So my bad. 2 Dark Magicians and 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons and everything else like that. So yeah, I know this shit from personal experience, my nigga. But anyway, long story short, and actually not long story short yet. I wanna clarify something. When I talk about budget decks, I'm not talking about, oh hey, I can build this deck and not spend on all of the expensive cards and everything else like that. No. I'm talking about full-blown budget. That means that when the deck is done, that means that deck is like under $100 or at least under $120 at the most. Yeah, budget deck that you can play in tournaments and everything else like that, you know, with the staples and everything else like that. That's what I mean when I say budget deck. Not, oh, I can skip on the expensive staples and still try to make this deck work. No, I'm talking about full-blown, this deck is done type budget. That is what I mean by the budget deck conversation. And I'm not going to hold you. Pokemon is going to win that conversation 100% of the time. Because, let's be real, them decks cost $40. That's the whole particular point. And if you nasty, I could throw in an extra 22. Wait, wrong joke. Anyway, long story short, I don't think Pokemon should be part of the budget deck conversation when it comes to playing competitive card games. Moving on into number two of the unpopular opinions. This one is going to be for Card 5 Vanguard. And my unpopular opinion for Card 5 Vanguard is that the player base is the reason why premium format died. Or is dying. Whichever one you want to put it at. Because let's be real, premium format is on its last legs and everything else like that. And let's be real, even though Bushiroad did a horrible job of basically just trying to balance out the game and everything else like that, at the same time, I also have to say that the player base is mostly part of the reason why this is happening too. Now, I'll give you a few examples of the reason why. The first one, and as much as I don't want to use tournament numbers as a prime example, I'm gonna have to give this one the exception to the rule. Because here's the thing. It's understandable that standard format was always going to have more numbers than premium format, players and everything else like that, because standard format is the one that Bushiroad is basically pushing more compared to premium format and everything else like that. And as a person who has played through both the first reboot and second reboot era of premium format, I have always noticed that not only the premium format was less than half of the standard format players, you also have to put into consideration that a majority of those players are basically only there to get the promo and then bounce. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen in standard format as well, but let's be real, I've noticed that the numbers were always high when it came to that in premium format compared to standard and everything else like that. Also, outside of the very last premium format that I have done in regionals a couple of years ago, I have never played a round one without that round one being a buy. I'm not even gonna hold you on it. I think that was the very first time, the last time I played Premium 4, I think that was the very first time I actually played a round one without getting a round one buy. And that is the reason why I have to use the tournament numbers. Now, granted, everybody's situation with tournament situation is completely different from mine. You have a different experience from it, but looking at it, from my experience, I can basically see it. Now, is it credible? Maybe not. Would you take it with a grain of salt? Maybe not as well. But also put into consideration that, let's be real, a lot of online outrage when it comes to the overall format as to why nobody really likes premium and everything else like that. And don't get me wrong, you have people who definitely prefer premium format over standard. Let's just be real on that. But at the same time, I don't see a lot of respect for the format. You like the format because it's not standard. You don't like the format because you actually like the format. You only like the format because it's not fucking standard format. And I've seen this multiple times. Also, keep in mind that there was hardly any of the newer players that didn't play during G era that actually likes and plays premium format in general. And if you are the type of person who actually respects premium format, then more power to you. But at the same time, I think what Bushiroad saw is the lack of participants, the lack of people actually respecting the format, and now they were like, hey, we're just gonna, fully focus on standard format and everything else like that, and forget about premium format and slowly roll it out. Still keep it because that's where mass majority of our veteran players are, but at the same time, we're just gonna treat it like a bald-headed stepchild at the end of the day. Also, I also see this as a public outrage when you really think about it. No, not a public outrage, a selective outrage, if you may be. And the reason why I see it as a selective outrage is because nobody really complained about premium format really leaving. I mean, really complained about like Bushiroad like doing the lack of premium format tournaments until they started slowly rotating it out and everything else like that. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of fucking Buddy Fight. Because y'all did the same shit with Buddy Fight. Y'all niggas was all like, oh, Buddy Fight was arguably Bushiroad's best product. And I call absolute bullshit on that. I call absolute bullshit on that because of if Buddy Fight was Bushiroad's best product, then how come it was hard for me to find a local? How come they always had to share a tournament space with White Swords? How come there was hardly anybody interested in Buddy Fight like that and everything else like that? So whenever I see anybody talk about, oh, they should have never got rid of Buddy Fight, I just see it as selective outrage. Bite me. But anyway, that's it for number 2. We gonna go on to number 3. My number 3 unpopular opinion is gonna come from Magic the Gathering. And my unpopular opinion is block sets should not come back. Now, there's like a huge debate on the Universal Beyond and, you know, in-universe sets and everything else like that, because, you know, a lot of people don't like Universal Beyond and everything else like that, especially like a lot of the veteran Magic players and everything else like that. However, I do remember seeing some conversation of maybe we should bring back block sets. And for those who don't play Magic or who didn't play Magic around the time block sets came out, it's pretty simple. Block sets is usually when they go to a plane, they stay in that plane for a couple of sets, which is called block sets and everything else like that. So it's kind of like an extension of the story. Like, for a prime example, think of it like how they did Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, right? Like how we had Infinity War, then we had to wait a whole year for Endgame to come out. This was kind of sort of similar with the block sets. For a prime example, my most favorite plane is Amoket, and Amoket was a block set. So the first one was Amoket, and the second one was Our Devastation. So the story would start in Amoket, the story would end in Our Devastation, or at least that part of the story. Anyway, I don't think that we should, now that I did the explanation, I don't think we should have block sets for one particular reason. Because the moment we hit that one particular set that nobody likes, y'all gonna start complaining about it and everything else like that. And y'all not gonna like staying in that particular block. And by the time we get to the pre-release for like the second part of that block, you know, those pre-release like things are gonna be like very low. You're going to see like a lot of uninterest and everything else like that. And then also keep in mind that the problem with the schedule currently is that Wizards is doing more Universal Beyond sets compared to in-universe sets. And a lot of people don't like that. So if we go into a block that nobody likes, and if Wizards keep this up with making more Universal Beyond sets compared to in-universe sets, then it's just going to become a whole clusterfuck of problems. Let's just be real on that. for prime example, I can give a set that nobody really liked in the last year and a half. Aether Drift. Nobody liked Aether Drift like that. If Aether Drift had a block set, like let's say the first one was Aether Drift, and let's say the second one was like, I don't know, like Torque of Mana or something like that. I'm not really good at names. Let's say that Torque Mana came out. Nobody is going to be interested in Torque Mana because now we get like Aether Drift, and then in between Aether Drift will be like, I don't know, fucking Hell of a Boss or like something like that. And then like after a Hell of a Boss, it'll be like, I don't know, like Sonic gets like a whole new set, and then we'll get to like Torque Mana right after, and nobody's gonna like the Hell of a Ball set, and nobody's gonna like the full Sonic set, and then nobody's definitely gonna like Torque Mana and everything else like that. So no, I don't think we should do fucking block sets anymore. I'm sorry, I'm not with it. As much as I like the set format, I don't think we should bring that back. Cause like the moment we get something like Aether Drift, and we gotta stay with like 2 to 3 sets in like Aether Drift and shit, nobody's gonna like it. At the end of the day, I'm not even gonna hold you. It's gonna be ass cheap. It's gonna be straight up ass. Let's just be real on that. But with all that being said, let's get to our fourth and final unpopular opinion. This one comes for White Swords, and it basically is Bushiroad needs to stop bullshitting with the reprint sets. Alright, I'm not going to hold you. Bushiroad always has an issue with reprinting sets and everything else like that. And I'm not going to lie. I know that like reprint sets is kind of sort of something that some people do agree with. But this particular example is kind of more of a personal reason, so that's why I'm considering it an unpopular opinion. But hear me out. I started White Swords like in 2019, like maybe the butt end of 2018, but I'm gonna just go with 2019, right? So I missed a good portion of White Swords, and if anybody knows, White Swords is that type of game where you basically just choose a series that exists in White Swords if you like the series a lot and everything else like that, and then basically try to, you know, play with that series and everything else like that, right? So that's like basically the gist of how to choose like what White Swords deck you want to start with and everything else like that, because I guarantee you some people got into like the game because of X, Y, and Z like sets that came out and stuff, right? Alright, so one of my favorite series is Madoka Magica. Legit one of my favorite series in like the whole entire game. Now, Madoka Magica was one of the very first wave of sets that came out when White Swords actually started. So if I think that was like back in 2012, 2013, I forgot when it was, but it was basically around that particular time, right? So White Sword's been around for a cool minute and everything else like that. So back in 2020, during lockdown era, they came out with back-to-back Magia record sets, which for those who don't know, Magia record is the continuation to the Madoka series with a whole new pro tag and everything else like that. The reason why it got back-to-back sets is because Magia record started as a gacha game, and Then they eventually got an anime. So the first set was strictly through the mobile game, and the second set basically was just straight out with the anime and everything else like that. Now, here's where the fucking issue comes from. A mass majority of some of the best cards that come from both Magia record sets requires you to have previous Madoka support, right? Like, for a prime example, like I think one of like the level 3 like blue Sayakas was like really good, and it required you to have Sayaka's Wish. And Sayaka's Wish is a super outprinted card. Especially, it's all like, so yeah, that was a fucking issue. And then of course, I wanted to build best girl, Mammy, but of course, I needed some of the Mammy support from the other set and everything else like that. So of course, now it's all like I had to spend, I think I spent like at least a good year trying to find all of like the old Mammy support and everything else like that, and then it's the same amount of time trying to get all the Sayaka wishes and everything else like that. It was bullshit, it was torture and everything else like that. And this all wouldn't have been that bad if Bushiroad should like reprinted like the Madoka sets and everything else like that around the time Magia record came out. And I know what everybody's saying. Oh, well, they probably didn't do it because they didn't know how much interest Madoka is going to have and everything else like that. So if that's the particular case, they did the same thing with Attack on Titan. When Attack on Titan came out with the final season set and everything else like that, they reprinted some of the stuff for the first set and everything else like that, because Attack on Titan also was another set that was in the first wave of support, you know, when White Swords like first came out and everything else like that. But then I think the reprint set that pissed me off the most was getting fucking Shin-Chan. Who the fuck is playing Shin-Chan? Let's just be real on that. So you mean to tell me Shin-Chan get a reprint set but not Madoka? That's bullshit. Let's just be real like that. Bushiroad, you have
the audacity
to do this shit. It's bullshit. I'm not even gonna hold you on it. But it gets worse. It gets even worse. So there was a thing that Bushiroad also came out with called the power-up sets. Now, the power-up sets included, I think there was it was 3 of them. It was my favorite anime back in high school, the Haruhi Suzumiya, the Meccan Holy Haruhi Suzumiya. It was Gurren Lagann, and it was Log Horizon, if I remember correctly. Now, these 3 sets came out around the time Standby didn't exist. So the power-up sets was basically supposed to be like trying to give these sets like, you know, Standby and everything else like that. There's 2 particular issues though. For one, the power-up set in Japan came out like I think 2018 or 2019. I don't remember which year it was, but it's a pretty old set and everything else like that. And we didn't see this get into English until like I think 2023 or 2024. I gotta look it up again. But yeah, around that particular time. So there's like a whole 5-year gap in between when the power-up set came out and then when the power-up set came out in English. And guess what? Bushiroad didn't reprint Haruhi. They didn't reprint Log Horizon. They didn't reprint Gurren Lagann and everything else like that. And I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's the simple fact that not too many people will be interested in those sets in general, which is the reason why they reprinted. Now, the power-up set only comes with extras. It does not come with a full deck and everything else like that. So let's say there's a player who is coming into the game and let's say they like during login and everything else like that. They want to build their favorite wife, Yoko, and everything else like that. So they get this power-up set, and then they realize, oh, this is only, you know, assorted pieces and everything else like that. It's not the full, you know, current login deck and everything else like that. But since they don't reprint sets and everything else like that, it basically gets up to a point where it's like, oh, I'm shit out of luck. Now I gotta start fishing for pieces and everything else like that because Bushiroad didn't reprint none of these sets. Now, granted, I know what you basically saying. Well, Bushiroad wasn't necessarily Bushiroad didn't think that there would be people who would be interested in these sets if they did decide to reprint it. And that's cool and all, but you could have at least reprinted the trial decks. All you had to do was reprint the trial decks. That way, if somebody wanted to get into the game and wanted to, you know, get into Gurren Lagann and everything else like that, they still have to fish for the older pieces and everything else like that. But at least by reprinting the trial deck, you will be able to use, you know, all the pieces that came out with this particular deck and everything else like that. I think that that's a major fuck up on Bushiroad's part and everything else like that. Let's just be real on that. So yeah, if you wasn't going to reprint the full sets, at least reprint like the you know, the trial decks and everything else like that. But that's all I have for my unpopular opinions. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, do whatever. But for now, we are out of here.
Hey yo.